All right, hello everyone. Welcome to I believe this is the fifth episode of Korkie's Corner. Joining me, of course, is my co-host, writer of Ice Cold and Deadly. Also working on the upcoming project Seeking Sad Guru and the Batman Conspiracy. My dad, Mike Korkie.
It's great to be here, everyone. It's great to be here, John.
Yep, thank you. It's good to have you back. Of course, we were not able to cover it the first 2 weeks. Past 2 weeks, just our lives got in the way, and our day-to-day lives got to come before this podcast. We have a lot of fun doing it, and it is good to be back. And I think I touched a little bit, but how did you enjoy being in Vegas to support your favorite sports team in the whole world?
Yeah, it was awful to see those Vegas Stanley Cup signs all over the place. They don't deserve it. They think they deserve it, but they don't deserve it.
I mean, the players deserve it, wouldn't you say?
I guess. I mean, they're hockey players like anybody else, but then again, they also decided to go play in that giant ashtray. So I don't really have anything good to say about them.
Yeah, I figured as much. But hey, you enjoyed the city. I mean, if you were an NHL player, wouldn't you want to be able to play hockey in that city?
No, I think Vegas would be pretty far down my list, to be honest with you. Um, there'd be lots of other places. Vegas might be halfway down the
Okay.
list.
All right. Well, that brought up an oh crap. Sorry, everyone. Just trying to move to a more comfortable spot in my room. That brought up a very interesting question I wanted to ask you, which was if you were an NHL player and you had a five-team no trade clause, what would be the five teams on your no trade clause?
Columbus would be one. Um, Let me think. You hit me out of left field with this. Columbus for sure. Um, I'm just thinking down the list of teams, places I wouldn't want to go. Uh, I don't know. Columbus for sure. I don't know what would be on yours, and then I'll think of mine.
Okay, so mine would be number one would be Arizona.
Mm,
They play in front of 4,000 people. If I'm an NHL player, I wouldn't want to do that. Their goalie went on a European podcast to talk about that. Mine would be this did just pop into my head for a second. This would be a good question to ask. So I'm catching myself off guard too. But LA would be another one. Anaheim, because they're terrible, would be another one. I would go to San Jose to play in that jersey. And then I'm trying to think. Columbus was a good one. Pittsburgh, that city's awful. I've been to Pittsburgh. No offense to the people in the city of Pittsburgh. I just do not like that city. And then, man, I'm trying to think. Trying to think where taxes are high because that's another factor for me, other than Canada, because I wouldn't mind playing hockey in Canada. Uh,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't.
the thing is, I mean, some of it's situational with the standings at the current moment and places
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to go. So I guess if you were Arizona makes sense from that perspective. Columbus, being an NHL player would be a huge gift. So there wouldn't be a whole lot of places where I wouldn't think that I could make the best of it. Uh, Certainly Arizona and Columbus. And then if I was forced to choose another, couple more teams, uh, I guess I'd have to say Winnipeg would be on the list, and Anaheim because they're so bad, and one other one might be the Nordiques. I wouldn't go to the Nordiques.
Oh yeah, Dad, that's a great pick there. And then my last team would actually be the New York Rangers because I don't feel like playing for a team that can only win one cup in 80 years.
Hmm.
So, and they've had good teams. I mean, how many cups did Henrik Lundqvist get? Oh yeah, that's right. He got none. Absolute poverty franchise in the city of New York. Disgrace to Madison Square Garden. But on to the main topic today. We'll cover a little bit of the offseason. So I guess the first question is so far, who do you think has had the worst offseason thus far?
Well, I would have said Detroit. They made a lot of moves that were sort of questionable, and the consensus I would say is They what was the most they made a trade that they I guess they got what's his name from Ottawa. Didn't they just get the DeBrincat from Ottawa?
They did get the Brinket, yes.
Yeah, up until that trade, I've felt like they had really downgraded their team.
Yeah.
And so other teams have been pretty quiet. But Detroit, even with that trade, was kind of teetering on you didn't, not only did you not only are your team trying to build itself up from the basement, you downgraded what you already had. So I'm going to stick with them even with the DeBrincat trade.
Yeah. I think right now, I think Ottawa getting a first round pick so far was really good. I mean, granted, they're in on Vladimir Tarasenko. They're one of the rumored teams. So this is coming out. Watch as soon as we finish recording and this is upgrading. Eric Carlson trade is going to be announced, and Vladimir Tarasenko is also going to sign in the span of 5 minutes. But as of this moment, none of that has happened. So anything that comes after the EK and Vladimir Tarasenko, I would say so far the worst offseason has been. I had the team in my head and then I think Ottawa's actually had a very weak offseason. They haven't done much. They did get a first and second round pick, but based on everything Ottawa wants to do, they're not really in a position where they want to be getting first and second round picks. Granted, they can leverage it in the future. I think you're going to be disappointed in this answer. I think a close second is Edmonton. They've lost quite, they're a team that lacks depth, and all they've done this offseason is had to dump some of their depth for cap reasons. So,
Well,
um,
I'm gonna disagree with that a little bit. Is they don't lack depth because they do have but they what they're you look at the team they lost to uh, the Golden Knights had extreme depth, right? Like the
yeah,
Oilers compared to what they used to have, they have a very legit third line center now, young guy up and coming. They had good wingers with him. They have a couple potential, Fogo was with them with on the third line last year. He'll be on the third line this year. And then the question is, well, do the young up and coming replacements fare as well as the depth players they had before? And I think they're taking some bets that they will. But you're right, the cap really crunched them. They would love to have signed, Nick Bugstad, I think, to another contract, but $2 million they just can't afford that. So they had to make some tough choices, and they're not done. It's all cap related.
yeah. So I'm going to get a little bit serious moving on to the next topic on who do we think had the best offseason. And I think right now for me by default, it's Chicago. And it is a shame because of the Kyle Beach situation. There have been zero consequences for that organization. As soon as before the draft lottery was even announced, they had made that money back from tickets. And it is a shame because I like Taylor Hall. Obviously, I grew up watching a lot of the Oilers, that his era of the Oilers, where it was kind of his team with Andrew Ference and Ilya Yakupov. They were awful, but I did grow up watching a lot of them. Corey Perry, I don't like Corey Perry because he really can't, but I do respect that he's completely redefined the way he plays hockey to continue to have a career in his old age. It would be a very interesting team, and then with the generational talent, but it just sucks that it's the team that covered up the rape of a player, and then not to mention the fact that Joe Quenneville and Stan Bowman, who worked for the organization, wrote that person who did the rape a letter of recommendation that led to someone who was only 3 years older than me in the hockey world to be sexually assaulted as well. I think it's a disgrace that that's the team that's able to build themselves up this year. They didn't get any draft picks stripped away from them, but the way it stands right now, by default from winning the draft lottery, they're the winner of this offseason. You can comment on that if you want. I know this it normally has to be lighthearted, but if I'm gonna not praise, but acknowledge Chicago as having the best offseason, I felt it was important to address what it is exactly. Why I have a problem with the fact that they're the team with the best offseason. But you can continue talking about that a little bit, or you can talk about who you think has had a very good the best offseason so far.
Well, you slagged my team. You took a pot shot at the Oilers, and because that's what you do, but I'm going to rise above that, and I'm going to say that Carolina. probably has had the best offseason so far. Not only are they getting Svechnikov back, but as I kind of saw the transactions coming across the wire, and potentially them making a move to get Carlson in there, and that's just even, I mean, that would certainly put them over the top. I think they've had an excellent offseason. What I've noticed about them, and I was referring to the Edmonton cap crunch. The reason that the Oilers are doing all this is they're in win now mode in the McDavid era, right? And they want to make sure that they win so that they can keep them for another era. But they're kind of going for it because they've got nothing to lose but Connor McDavid, and that's a lot to lose. Whereas the Hurricanes, they seem to they don't I don't foresee a window with them, right? The moves that they're making, they seem to keep cap space available. Aho, yeah, sure, he's got a shelf life, but he's got a long shelf life. And you just and Svechnikov even more, you just get the sense that you're looking at with this organization, an organization that's good at picking players, so they don't have to they can have a good off season without quote unquote going for it. And that's the sense that I got for them. So even if you want to badmouth my team, I'm not going to take your bait, and I'm going to give your team credit.
I do praise the Oilers countless times. I just think when you look at it, that it's not their fault. A lot of it is Gary Bettman's insistence on keeping the flat cap, even when the owners, who are his bosses, want the cap to go up. I don't think it's completely Edmonton's fault. The cap should be going up at this point, but he insists on having those players make those escrow payments to keep the 50-50 revenue split, even if the owners don't really seem to care that much about the 2020 50-50 revenue split. Um, so there is that. And then I do another team I want to talk about that would have probably won, I think is the best run organization right now. And that's as a team who's in the Metropolitan Division. I think Carolina's Cup window opened around 2 years ago. They haven't won one yet. I think they got like around 5, 6 more years. As long as they have Svech and Aho, who are both young, there's always going to be some level of window. But in 5, 6, 7 years, Jacob Slavin's going to be getting up there in age. And this team, as it showed in game 4 against Florida, is not the same without Jacob Slavin. And he's going to be a hard defenseman to replace as he gets older and starts to decline. So I think they're in a Jacob Slavin window because there's not. I don't think there's a single defensive defenseman as good as him. But I am legitimately scared of New Jersey. They've extended Timo Meyer. He's going to be able to fit in that system better. I think they may. Oh, and then trading for Tyler Toffoli, who fits perfectly into their speed game, which is funny. It's the opposite of the New Jersey Devils that we know. But Jack Hughes is only going to get better. What? Who's the other Hughes brother they have? Because Quinn Hughes, I know, is on Vancouver. They have the youngest Hughes brother as well. Um, they're a scary team, and I guarantee you, I think Edmonton is going to be one of the teams that we're talking about right now that we're going to look back on and have a very good core. Carolina, I hope, is going to be another one, but I don't get nice things in sports that often, so I have my reservations about it, just in life lessons. I think Colorado's already won a cup, and that core could probably win another cup. Vegas, of course, and but New Jersey, I think, is right up there in cup contenders for the future now. So.
Yeah, they probably are. They got some good young talent. We'll see. I part of me wonders if they might take a step back next year, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I think the future looks bright in New Jersey, and they terrify me. And then, Dad, I'll put praise the question off to you. Who do you think is the most intriguing team coming into the start of next season?
Uh, well, let's look down the list here. Um, well, I guess, and I'm really starting to hate them, but the Kings will be intriguing with Pierre-Luc Dubois. Um, he seems to be a bit of a cancer eventually, but he also there's no denying his talent. So when you're talking about the three centermen that they've got with Kopitar and PLD and I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Byfield?
No, the centerman, the Deneau,
Uh,
Philip Deneau. And with those three, they're in my mind one of the only teams that rivals the Oilers at center.
Right.
So, I mean, again, the Oilers have the three, down the middle. They have the best center depth in the league, but there's a few teams that can challenge them, and I would say that right now LA comes the closest.
Yeah, I think another interesting team for me is there are two Canadian teams, and it's not because they've had good off seasons. I would say Winnipeg is making the most out of the best situation. They're one of the teams.
Mm,
But another one in what are they gonna do is Calgary. They got two players that don't seem to want like just for whatever reason, Connor McDavid, if he has any legacy whatsoever, it's the guy who completely killed the Johnny Gaudreau era of Calgary, other than his Hart trophies, because all of those guys are wanting to leave. Um,
yeah, well, I mean, that would have been another potential answer of the worst off season because Calgary's really taken it in the shorts again. But they seem to they're gonna have to work. Clearly, they've got some players that are not happy there, and we'll have to see how much of it was due to Sutter. Um, driving players out, and they've since fired him, so that'll help. But I got to give my honorable mention for worst offseason to the Boston Bruins for signing Milan Lucic. Just a horrible, horrible signing, and the guy's done in the NHL. And they signed him for I guess nostalgia reasons. He doesn't bring anything to the table. Ironically, that on the when he came to the Oilers, he pushed Taylor Hall out, comes to the Bruins, pushes Taylor Hall out again.
I mean, they only signed him for 1 million. That is true, actually. That was the year they traded him. But yeah, Mila at Boston is interesting because I think they're trying to figure out what their plans are. Because if Krejci and Bergeron come back, I mean, why not bring back Lucic and kind of run the 2011 squad that people still try to replicate to this day. There's something about that 2011 Bruins, but I do tend to agree with you on the like they haven't done anything, but I do think a lot of that is because we don't know the Krejci Bergeron situation.
Yeah. And I don't know if they'll come back. I mean, it seems like they will because they haven't done anything, right? So that kind of tells you that they'll do something, that's because they're both coming back, kind of making up their mind for sure. But they really did capture lightning in a bottle last year. And I don't think they can do it again with the centers are even that much older, right? So the experience, the game in, game out professionalism that team showed last year that led them to an NHL record was not because their talent was so much better than everybody else's. It's because they know how to, you know, prepare for a game and be ready to play for every game in the regular season. And you gotta give them credit for that. But now they're a year older. They lost some key pieces for that, and they brought in Milan Lucic, who he just can't. He
Yeah.
can't like he's very useful in a fight, right? But then the game has passed him by.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think he's a fine fourth liner. I don't see him as like he's not going to be the Milan Lucic that everyone was afraid when they were going to play against because he would probably lay a dirty hit, win a fight against your best player, and then score a couple goals and get an assist on any given night. He's not that Milan Lucic, but the difference is with the Oilers signing, the Oilers expect him to be that Milan Lucic. The Bruins don't. And I mean, do I think losing Taylor Hall and Dmitry Orlov is a positive trade-off? No, I think the Bruins have had a very bad offseason, but a lot of it is they're just kind of held hostage by A, the cap, and B, they don't know what their core wants to do, and they'll be able to get hometown discounts for that core. But I mean, like Boston with Bergeron and Krejci is a cup contender. Boston without him is a contender to miss the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're a cup contender this upcoming year. Certainly they were last year, but I mean, Bergeron's coming up on 40 really quick here. If he's not 40 this year, he's got to be getting. I mean, even the little guy there, Marchand, he's like 35 this year. So that's not spring chickens. That catches up with you eventually.
Yep. And then another team I guess is interesting to talk about because there are two teams that are kind of paired off together, and they are the two oldest teams in the league, and that is Pittsburgh and Washington. And that they've had the two best players in the league. They've consistently made the playoffs since basically I started watching hockey. What are your thoughts on Ovechkin and Crosby? I mean, I think we both know Wayne Ovechkin's going to be able to have the goal record. So the goal record, even though I do think it is amazing that I'm going to get to see an important record like that broken, it's not going to be as satisfying to see Ovechkin, Gretzky, Gretzky instead of just Gretzky, Gretzky, Gretzky. But records are made to be broken. And Sidney Crosby, who I think as good as Ovechkin has been, I think Sidney Crosby is an all-time better player than Ovechkin, just in what he's been able to do. He was a better leader. He missed the prime of his career, and he still had as good of a record. So you have all that factored in. If you're Pittsburgh and you're Washington, the GM, do you like the or assistant GM, I guess, do you like the moves those teams have made?
Yeah, I figure that they're probably one last kick at the can type moves. Might as well try and take advantage. And I'm sure both those players, I mean, when you're just a pure shooter like Ovechkin, I mean, not just a pure shooter, but like when you've got that in your arsenal, that doesn't really go away, right? So I feel like he can continue to just pump goals in, and that Crosby still has stuff in the tank left too. I just don't know how much you have to surround them with and in order to make them a
Yeah.
contender, and whether you can do that within the, again, they both have big cap hits. So if you're saying, well, these are useful guys we still want to build around, well, they're not a deal anymore for relative to what they make. So it's going to be tougher. But I mean,
Yeah.
I think they both. I think my impression was Pittsburgh had a little bit better, did a little bit more than Boston did.
Yeah. They are the front runner of getting EK65. So that is worth noting. The best defenseman in the league last year. I would say best offensive defenseman in the league. I think Eric Carlson is lacking on defense, but they are the front runner for him. Do you think Eric Carlson is the kind of player that can get Pittsburgh back over the hump, or do you think that's kind of it for him?
I don't know. I mean, I think Carlson will help. I just don't think that it will get them over the hump to be a contender.
Right.
They weren't a contender this year. They obviously didn't even make the playoffs. They had some easy games to win. And at the end, like I think they lost to Chicago the last game, and that's what got Florida into the playoffs.
And it
Was it
got
was
him
it?
Connor big. It was actually Chicago. If you look at the game, yeah, when Pittsburgh lost, they would have made the playoffs. Florida wouldn't have gotten all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, and I think Columbus would have the team that got Bedard. So that random regular season game has had the most massive butterfly effect maybe in the history of hockey.
But my yeah, I mean that's interesting. My point is that when you're a team that can't win that game against that team, and you just to make the playoffs, I don't think Carlson's going to put you over the edge. You
Yeah.
have to you have to have the type of core that can win that game, leave no doubt and win that game, and then maybe that player puts you over the edge. But I don't think that he makes such a huge difference anymore at this point in his career that he takes them from team that can't beat Chicago to get into the playoffs to Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think Eric Carlson, and he's older. Like Pittsburgh is a team that needs youth, but they can't really pursue youth because Crosby, Malkin, and Letang don't want to go through a rebuild because by the time the rebuild's over, those guys are gone, retired, and probably getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. But it does feel like we're in an interesting time. Do you think hockey's at a point where strip it down rebuilds are kind of ending? Because Winnipeg, Calgary, Nashville, all these teams that I feel like normally would be in strip it down, let's rebuild from scratch mode, are not doing that. They're trying to retool. Do you think the retool is replacing the rebuild? And if you're a GM, do you think it's smarter to do a retool or do a rebuild?
So a couple factors I think are at play. One is the drafting of every team. is so much better than it used to be, that with the central scouting, and you got to really be going off the board not to get prospects in your pipeline. So that's one. So then the question becomes, do you completely strip it down and get rid of everybody, sort of like Arizona has done, sort of like Chicago's done? Or do you say, well, the fact that I now have $40 million worth of cap space, because all the players, like in Calgary's case, or whatever, all the players are leaving and they took up this huge amount of cap space. Well, there's other guys that'll fill that void, are happy to fill that void. Uh, you can replace, look at Nazem Kadri, right? Calgary thought that they had a major problem losing Kachuk, that they'd all of a sudden, well, Kadri's available, right?
Yeah.
Like because they have the cap. So cap space is almost as much of an asset. No, it is. Cap space is just as much of an asset as having players in the pipeline. Now you have to pay a little bit more, but you also don't have to wait as long. So I think that if I was an owner, I would have to be pretty. I would have to have a pretty compelling case for why it needed to be stripped
Yeah.
down.
Although I did come up with, so you know how the NBA and NFL, they have luxury taxes, so teams can go like 50 million over the cap and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
I figured out a solution because I don't really agree with the luxury tax because there's no point in having a cap if teams can just pay a small fine to win the championships that all the seats are going to replace from the playoff runs. I think salary cap space should be tradable like drafting. So if Arizona has $40 million in cap space, instead of Oilers having to trade Zach Cassian, which if by the way, if the Oilers had Zach Cassian on their team, they would have beat Vegas. Write it here first. Um, but
Well, he's available, so we'll see if they sign him.
yeah, but they if they trade like it can be instead of trading Zach Caston, it can be all right, we'll give you a first round pick, give us $5 million worth of cap space. And then Arizona's cap space becomes $5 million lower. It keeps the 50-50 revenue split going because the teams can't spend that far over the cap. It doesn't allow for cheating and everything. People don't get mad at Tampa for the LTIR and everything because they can just trade. They could have traded for to get Kucherov within their salary cap and they wouldn't have had to kind of do the shenanigans that they did. I don't think anyone loses if you're allowed to trade cap space for X number of years where you have extra cap
You
space.
know who loses? You know who loses?
So
Gary Bettman loses, because all of a sudden, all like Toronto's going to win the cup every year, right? Like Toronto. When you look at Toronto's budget, the amount of money that they bring in versus what the salary cap is, they could outspend everybody, and that's a big part of the reason that Gary Bettman brought in the salary cap, is he saw this coming, that the Montreals, the Torontos, the Vancouvers, they can outspend any American market. And if you put a system in place like that where they could buy cap space from teams, Arizona would be selling all of its cap space to Toronto, and Gary would be going out of his mind. So it's that's who the loser would be.
I guess, but I mean, I think it's a good solution because you got to give up assets. So it's not like you can just trade for cap space regardless. Because especially when you hit a plateau in cap space, the way they have right now because of the pandemic and everything, the if you trade the wrong assets for cap space, you can be completely hampered because you have nothing, even though sure you have cap space and everything. But then or your cap space could die quickly. If you're like, all right, we have a 3 year window, let's trade for $10 million in cap space, so we have an extra 10 million for the next 3 years of cap space. When that 10 million goes down, you can be screwed. So it's not like it's just
Yeah, well,
automatic.
I like the idea,
Yeah. So
but
that
I just don't see it happening for that reason.
yeah, I think also someone said the players.
It creates an inequity.
Yeah, I can see that absolutely. So and then the last thing we want to talk about, I know you had been watching Peaky Blinders. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. Before we head out, I'm just wondering if you could share your thoughts on the series as a whole.
Yeah, so I made it to the end of season 4, and I liked it. It was it, it's just an all around compelling story. I generally don't like stories from that time frame. and it just, I don't know why, but it just doesn't really appeal to me. But the story is so gripping. I felt that I liked it quite a bit. I stopped when I got to the beginning of season 5, because spoiler alert, it looks like they lose everything in the great the great stock market crash or whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, I don't know, I don't like that story. I don't like those stories either. So I'm a money guy, and so starting a season off where they've lost everything in the depression, I just was kind of like, yeah, I'll take a break from it for a while.
Okay. I will say, without any spoilers other than that, they don't lose everything. They've just lost a crap ton because they're still in the UK. They still get to live their luxurious 1930s lifestyle. Um, so you have that. But I think season 5 and 6, I think the way they handled the character of Oswald Mosley was a very interesting story. Was a very interesting antagonist. I think he was a perfect choice to be a quote unquote final boss, which, spoilers, the leader of the British Union of Fascists is the bad guy of a story. I don't think, but
Yeah, well, now you're spoiling it for me, but I will say that the guy who played the mob boss, or what's his name?
Adrian Brody.
Yeah, does like the best Robert De Niro impression I've ever seen. Like I was really impressed. I was really impressed. I couldn't tell whether he was like basically channeling other actors that he's seen play mafiosos, or if he came up with that on his own. But I was pretty. I just kept flashing over to like De Niro and Pacino when with his performance.
Yeah, no, I loved Adrian Brody. I think he's my second favorite villain. I do think you should watch it just for the villain of the final two seasons is I think better. Like, I think those are the two best villains. And then, I mean, you could argue Thomas Shelby is a bit of a villain himself, but yeah, I think actually he's not my favorite, but the best villain was Patty Constantine's priest character. I have not hated a character that much, maybe ever. There was just something about him. I could not stand him. And it's weird because I liked Viserys in House of the Dragon as a character so much. It took me 5 episodes to realize it's the same actor. So
Yeah, it's true. You raise a good point about the Peaky Blinders again being another show where the basically the hero is an anti-hero. And I can't remember the last time I, I can, but there aren't too many shows anymore that that the hero isn't an anti-hero.
right. So yeah, I'm trying to think. Arrow, which that show fell off quickly, but Arrow was one. The Flash as well. So the CW shows, which I know you're very excited about comic book stuff. I would say, yeah, I think the Breaking Bad effect. Everyone kind of, for whatever reason, they love watching shows where the good guys are scummy people. Like when Breaking Bad, Sons of Anarchy, The Shield, like all these shows came out, just everyone was like, "Oh, this is amazing."
It's a little more realistic because everybody's flawed, but on the other hand, you don't have to take the worst people and tell it all from their perspective. Every
Yeah.
show.
Yeah, I do agree. I think not Pedro Pascal's character, but Ellie from The Last of Us could be considered a just straight up hero, not an anti-hero, even though she's being raised by a anti-hero.
Anti-hero, yeah.
So, but then The Walking Dead, I would say Rick, he did cruel things, but I would never consider Rick to be an anti-hero.
Yeah,
I
I said lately, I consider that to be an old show.
Yeah, that is fair, but that we're running out of time for this week's episode, everyone. If you heard my phone, of course, I'm starting to get busy once again. So I want to thank my dad for joining us. It's good to be back, and we'll see you guys next week for another edition of Corky's Corner.
Stay horny, my friends.
Yep. All right.